Hi folks, Father David here with the first in a series of videos on St. Catherine of Siena, one of the great saints we are blessed to honor in the Order of Preachers, or the Dominicans. As always, if you like what we have going on in our little corner of the family of God, please give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to keep updated on what we're talking about. If there are some things you would like to see discussed, either about the Episcopal Church, the Anglican Dominicans, which is the religious order that I belong to, or just about anything at all, please leave them in the comment section below. And with that, let's begin. The charism of the Dominicans, also known as the Order of Preachers, may be encapsulated into several mottos. One of those mottos is Laudare, Benedicere, Predicare, or to praise, to bless, and to preach. And another is Contemplare et contemplata alias tradere, or to contemplate and to give others the fruits of contemplation. A third, and perhaps the most succinct, is Veritas, or truth. Dominicans use their gift of preaching and study to bring the church to a greater and fuller knowledge of God, who we consider to be the ultimate truth. Many Dominicans have been entered into the role of saints over the course of church history, but two have been honored to have received the appellation Doctor of the Church, and those are St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Catherine of Siena. Aquinas is well known for his theological treatises, namely the Summa Theologica, and that has influenced church teachings for centuries. In many ways, Aquinas is the archetype of the great theological mind to which many Dominicans aspire. Catherine, on the other hand, embodies the mystical tradition of the Church, where knowledge and love of God is gained not through rigorous academic study, but mainly through prayer and contemplation. So this is the first in a series of 5 videos. In this one, we'll take a brief look at the big picture circumstances in Europe and in major events in Catherine's life to provide some context. If you'd like to skip the history lesson, by all means, feel free to skip to the next installment. Secondly, we'll explore important images, namely that of the bridge and the tree in her book, The Dialogue, which is a conversation between the soul and God. We will then look at her idea of discernment or discretion in the dialogue, as well as in her other writings, specifically in her letters and prayers. And next, we'll see how Catherine dealt with the political and ecclesiastical situations in which she was involved. And finally, there'll be a short section on how her teachings may be applied in the 21st century. Europe in the late Middle Ages was a time of great change. A warm climatic period and a robust population growth since the turn of the millennium had spurred the developments of cities, towns, and a gradual move away from the feudal system. After 1300, a series of famines, plagues, and political upheaval brought turmoil to the continent. Peasants facing downward pressure as a result of population growth and food storages were moved to revolt. The Holy Roman Empire was in decline, and the 100 Years' War raged across Europe. The warming trend of the High Middle Ages reversed around the year 1300 and began what is known as the Little Ice Age, which brought longer and harsher winters, and with that change brought less food for an already overpopulated continent. The Church, long thought to be a bastion of stability and unity since the fall of the Western Roman Empire, was facing its own pressures. This created inevitable tension with the Church, which had already enjoyed significant secular power in its own right. This tension only increased with Pope Boniface VIII's papal bull, Udum Sanctam, in which he declared, "Apart from the Church, there is no salvation," and in essence also said that the Church's authority was supreme over any worldly power. In 1305, however, under pressure from the French monarch, the papacy moved from its centuries-old home in Rome to Avignon, which is located in modern-day France. The papal court remained there for the better part of the 1300s and became increasingly under the influence of the French monarch. Corruption among clergy, especially with regards to simony and the selling of indulgences, and the new beginnings of quasi-monastic orders such as the Beguines in the Low Country were outside of the authorities of the church. All of these began to plant seeds for the Protestant Reformation, which was still 200 years old. But it was into this world, this ever-changing world of climate change and political upheaval, that St. Catherine of Siena was born. Catherine Benincasa was traditionally thought to have been born on Sunday, 25th of March, 1347, as the daughter of a middle-class merchant in Siena. Her spiritual journey began at the age of 6 when she witnessed a vision of Christ dressed in papal regalia above the local church while being attended by angels. And from that moment, she devoted herself to ascetic vows and took a vow of virginity. Later, she would make for herself a makeshift cell in her father's house. It should be noted that this life was not granted to her easily by her parents, though they relented when they saw there was no dissuading Catherine from her chosen path. Catherine also agreed to help her parents and family with running the household to some extent while maintaining her austere lifestyle. But the death of her sister Bonaventure led Catherine to seek and to put on the mantle of the Sisters of Penance of St. Dominic at the age of 17. The Mantigliata, as they were known, were mostly devout widows, and Catherine was remarkable in that she was the first virgin member of their order. Catherine continued her ascetic life in her father's house and kept in contact with the outside world through her confessors and her spiritual directors, all of whom were Dominicans. In addition, Catherine also received religious instruction from members of other religious orders, such as the Franciscans and the Augustinians. Catherine would have been content to spend her life as a quasi-solitary in her father's house, if not for a vision of her being married to Christ at the age of 20. In this vision, Christ called her to act on her vocation as a member of an apostolic order and perform acts of mercy and charity such as almsgiving and other work with the poor of Siena. While she longed to spend her time alone with the alone, Christ reminded her that she desired a union with a God whose work was to be done out among the people of God. Catherine's mystical experiences did not end, however, for she continued to receive visions such as drinking blood from Christ's wounded side, or Christ putting a nail through her hand. During the Mass, she would sometimes go into an ecstatic trance at the moment of reception of the host and remain transfixed for hours. Catherine, by this point, had begun to draw others to herself into a sort of family, which included learned individuals from Siena as well as other parts of Tuscany. At this time, she began dictating letters and becoming involved in political matters, most notably her correspondence with Pope Gregory XI, which began in 1374. These issues on which she wrote included a defense of the Crusades, the reform of the Church, bringing peace to the Italian peninsula, and a return of the papacy from the south of France and Avignon to Rome. And by now, Catherine had gained a reputation for being a holy woman who also had a keen understanding of the political situation. So there's actually some disagreement on how much Catherine's letters influenced Pope Gregory, but it can be said that the papacy actually did return to Rome in 1377, even as there was a series of what are now known as anti-popes who were reigning in Avignon. Catherine spent the better part of the remainder of her years in Siena, where she established a convent and then dictated the Dialogue, which is a great book that is a series of conversations between her soul and God. And we'll talk some about that book in the next video. Catherine supported Pope Gregory's successor, Urban VI, because she was greatly impressed with his moral character. And she remained a staunch defender of Urban despite his well-reserved reputation for having a bit of a temper. And she also defended having the papacy back in Rome until the day she died in 1380. Affection for Catherine and her influence did not wane with her passing. After her death, she was proclaimed a saint in 1461, and then later Saint Patroness of Rome in 1866. By 1939, she was named primary patroness of Italy along with St. Francis of Assisi, and finally was granted the title Doctor of the Church in 1970. With all of these titles and accolades, it is no wonder that she has been recognized as a model for holiness for all times, for entire nations and peoples, having been entrusted to her spiritual guidance and intercession. So that's a brief history about Catherine of Siena and the world she lived in. She was a remarkable woman who was a church influencer long before the days of Instagram and social media. And as we go along, I hope you find some of her ideas edifying and that they bring you some hope and strength during these days. And when we talk about how she interacted with the political powers of the day, both in the church and in the world, I hope you'll find her just as fierce as I have. So stay tuned for our next video where we do a little bit of a dive into her great book, The Dialogue, which is a conversation between her soul and God. I hope you're all having a great and blessed week, and take care.